In the void between galaxies, where no star burns and no light reaches, something vast has been moving for longer than any empire has kept records. It does not announce itself with banners or proclamations. It does not negotiate, and it does not retreat. Entire civilizations have vanished in its passing, leaving behind nothing but bare rock and silence, as though the world itself had been peeled away and consumed. For centuries, the Imperium of man believed itself the master of the galaxy, locked in eternal struggle with rival empires, ancient enemies, and the corruptions of the warp. Then came a warning from the eastern fringe, a signal so vast that entire fleets of augur stations recorded it simultaneously. Something enormous was crossing the black gulf between galaxies, and it was coming this way. What arrived was not an army in any sense the Imperium understood. It was an organism, a single, coordinated, ravenous whole spread across billions of kilometers of space, and it had one purpose: to consume. This is the story of the Tyranids and of the terrible hunger that may, in the end, prove greater than any empire humanity has ever built. The origins of the Tyranids remain a matter of both scientific inquiry and considerable anxiety among those who study them. Unlike most galactic powers whose histories can be traced through ruins, records, and oral tradition, the Tyranids appear to originate from beyond the galaxy entirely. The first confirmed contact came when Imperial scouts detected a series of massive biological signatures approaching from intergalactic space, structures that defied classification as either ships or creatures because they were, in truth, both. These were the vanguard of what would come to be called Hive Fleet Behemoth, and their arrival marked the beginning of a new and terrible chapter in the history of the galaxy. Yet evidence gathered since that first contact suggests the Tyranids had been active long before humanity noticed them. Fragmentary records, half-corrupted data slates, and the ruins of worlds stripped bare of all organic matter point to a presence that may have been probing the galaxy's edge for millennia, testing its defenses, gathering information, feeding quietly at its margins before the true invasion began. To understand the scale of the threat the Tyranids represent, one must first abandon the assumptions that govern the study of every other power in the galaxy. Empires rise from ambition. Religions rise from belief. Even the demonic forces of the warp are driven by something resembling desire, however alien. The Tyranids are governed by none of these things. They are driven by need, absolute and unrelenting, the same need that drives any organism to seek sustenance, except magnified across a scale that defies ordinary comprehension. Every world they strip, every fleet they send into battle, every horrific new form their biology produces exists for a single reason: to feed a hunger that has never once been satisfied and, by all available evidence, never will be. Where they came from originally is a question that has occupied the finest minds among the Adeptus Mechanicus and the most learned scholars of the Ordo Xenos, and the honest answer is that no one knows for certain. Some theorize that the Tyranids are the product of a galaxy, or perhaps several galaxies, that were consumed entirely before this one, their biomass processed and repurposed into the very organisms now advancing on the Imperium. Others suggest a stranger and more unsettling possibility, that the Tyranids did not evolve in any galaxy at all, but rather emerged in the vast emptiness between them, shaped by conditions so alien that their biology bears no resemblance to anything born under the light of a star. What can be said with confidence is this: wherever they originated, that place no longer exists in any recognizable form. It has been consumed, and the Tyranids have moved on, following a route that leads, inevitably, toward every inhabited world they encounter. The mechanism by which the Tyranids operate begins long before their main battle organisms ever make planetfall. Their fleets do not simply arrive and attack. They approach with patience and, That patience is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of their entire strategy. As a hive fleet nears a target system, it dispatches smaller, swifter organisms ahead of the main body. These vanguard creatures, often no larger than starships themselves, exist purely to scout, to test defenses, and to gather genetic information about the life they encounter. Every creature they kill, every biological sample they retrieve, is processed and analyzed by the collective intelligence that guides them, and the information gathered is used to adapt the forms that follow. A world defended by heavy armor will face waves of new organisms bred specifically to counter armored vehicles. A world reliant on aerial superiority will find the skies contested by fresh predators built for that exact purpose. The Tyranids do not simply attack. They study and then they answer. Once a world has been sufficiently assessed, the true invasion begins, and it unfolds with a horrifying efficiency that few other powers in the galaxy can match. Spore clouds descend through the atmosphere, releasing creatures adapted for every environment the planet offers, from dense jungle to arid wasteland to the tunnels beneath its cities. Ground forces advance not as an army marches, but as a wave moves across a shore, without hesitation, without fear, and without any concept of retreat. Behind them come the truly monstrous organisms, towering bio-titans capable of leveling fortifications, and the swarms only grow denser as the battle continues, because every fallen defender, every corpse left on the field, becomes potential biomass to be reclaimed. This is perhaps the most disturbing element of Tyranid warfare. They do not merely defeat their enemies, they consume them, converting the dead, and eventually the dying world itself, into raw material for the next generation of their kind. The endpoint of every successful invasion is a process that Imperial scholars have come to call biological reclamation, though those who have witnessed it firsthand often use less clinical language. Enormous organisms, some large enough to be visible from orbit, descend to the surface and begin breaking down everything of biological value, plant life, animal life, and the remains of every combatant, into a nutrient slurry that is then drawn upward into waiting bioships through vast root-like tendrils. Within weeks, sometimes days, a world that once supported forests, oceans teeming with life, and cities of millions can be reduced to bare stone and dust, its atmosphere stripped, its biosphere entirely erased. What remains afterward is not a battlefield in the traditional sense. It is a corpse, and an unusually thorough one. None of this would be possible without the force that binds every Tyranid organism into a single coordinated whole, a presence the Imperium has named the Hive Mind. It is, by every available measure, unlike any form of command structure devised by any other civilization. There is no chain of officers relaying orders down through ranks. There is no council debating strategy. Instead, every Tyranid organism, from the smallest scuttling creature to the largest biotitan, exists as an extension of a single overarching consciousness, connected through a form of psychic resonance that operates across distances that should, by any reasonable understanding of physics, make coordination impossible. Fleets separated by dozens of light years have been observed adjusting their strategies in apparent unison, responding to threats before conventional communication could possibly have reached them. The hive mind does not send messages. It simply thinks, and its thoughts become the actions of billions of organisms scattered across the width of a galaxy. This raises a question that has troubled Imperial scholars since the first hive fleets were identified. What does the hive mind actually want? The easy answer is that it wants only to feed, and there is truth in that. Every action the Tyranids take ultimately serves the acquisition of biomass and genetic material. But there is evidence suggesting something more deliberate at work, a form of intelligence capable of long-term strategy that stretches across centuries. The hive mind has been observed retreating from battles it could plausibly have won, preserving its bioships rather than expending them needlessly. It has adapted its tactics in response to specific commanders, suggesting not merely instinct, but something resembling learning, and perhaps even memory. Whether the hive mind possesses anything resembling true sentience, in the sense that a human or an alien statesman might understand it, remains fiercely debated. What is not debated is its effectiveness. Whatever the hive mind is, it has proven capable of directing one of the most devastating military forces the galaxy has ever encountered. It is worth pausing here to consider the scale on which the Tyranids operate, because scale is central to understanding why they are regarded with such particular dread. The Imperium of man, vast as it is, still consists of individual worlds, individual fleets, individual commanders who can be reasoned with, bargained with, or in rare cases, defeated and replaced. The Tyranids offer none of these possibilities. A single hive fleet may consist of more bioships than the largest Imperial armada, each one carrying billions of organisms, and behind that fleet often lie others, following in its wake drawn by the same hunger. Destroy one fleet, and the hive mind simply redirects another. There is no capital to seize, no leadership to assassinate, no treaty to sign, because the entity making these decisions has no fixed location and no singular form that could be targeted even if one wished to try. Since that first confirmed contact with Hive Fleet Behemoth, the Imperium has catalogued numerous subsequent incursions, each given a name drawn from history's great destroyers, and each exhibiting its own distinct character, as though the hive mind experiments with different approaches depending on what it has learned from previous campaigns. Hive Fleet Behemoth itself was characterized by raw, overwhelming aggression, a direct assault that tore through Imperial defenses with brutal simplicity, testing the galaxy's resistance in its rawest form. It was eventually halted, at tremendous cost, but its passage confirmed to a shaken Imperium that this was no isolated incident. It was the beginning. Where Behemoth was blunt, the fleet that followed proved considerably more calculated. Hive Fleet Kraken approached not as a single overwhelming mass, but as a dispersed, unpredictable presence, splitting into countless smaller splinter fleets that struck across a far broader stretch of space simultaneously. This scattered approach made Kraken extraordinarily difficult to counter, because Imperial forces could never be certain where the next strike would fall, and by the time defenses were mobilized in one sector, another world entirely had already been consumed. Kraken also displayed a disturbing degree of adaptability in its biological forms, producing organisms suited to the specific defenses of each world it encountered with a speed that suggested the hive mind was refining its methods in real time. Perhaps the most unsettling of the hive fleets, at least in terms of what it revealed about the Tyranid's capacity for subtlety, was Hive Fleet Leviathan. Rather than announcing its presence through overwhelming force alone, Leviathan employed infiltration organisms capable of insinuating themselves into a target world's population and infrastructure before the main invasion ever began, sabotaging defenses and sowing confusion from within. Leviathan's campaign demonstrated that the Tyranids were not merely capable of brute strength, but of strategic deception, a revelation that forced Imperial commanders to reconsider every assumption they had made about how these creatures operated. Later incursions only deepened the sense of dread surrounding the Tyranid threat. Hive Fleet Tiamat pressed into regions of space already weakened by centuries of war, exploiting divisions between rival factions who were too consumed by their own conflicts to mount a unified defense. Other, smaller fleets and splinter forces have emerged in the years since, each one a fragment of the greater whole, each one capable of consuming an entire world if left unchecked. What unites every one of these incursions, regardless of their individual character, is the underlying truth that none of them were the last. The hive mind does not exhaust itself. It learns, and it sends more. This pattern of learning is perhaps the single most important factor in understanding why the Tyranid menace is regarded as categorically different from every other threat the Imperium faces. A rival empire that suffers a devastating defeat may take generations to recover its strength, if it recovers at all. The hive mind suffers no such limitation. Every engagement, win or lose, provides data, and that data is incorporated almost immediately into the biological forms that follow. Weapons that proved effective against one generation of Tyranid organisms have, in documented cases, proven far less effective only decades later, because the creatures facing them had, in the intervening years, been redesigned specifically to counter them. No other power in the galaxy adapts with such speed, because no other power can simply grow a new army from the biomass of the last one and shape it however the moment requires. What can be said with the full weight of everything observed since that first contact with Hive Fleet Behemoth is this: the Tyranids do not conquer in any sense that history has previously recorded. They do not seek to rule. They do not seek glory or vengeance or even survival in the way that word is normally understood, because the hive mind that guides them appears to have no fear of its own destruction, only an unbroken drive to expand and consume. Every world lost to them is not simply defeated. It is erased, its biosphere unmade, its history reduced to silence, its very substance folded into the endless, patient hunger of something that crossed the gulf between galaxies for reasons that remain, even now, only partially understood. It is this capacity for adaptation, more than any single battle or any individual monstrous organism, that has led the most senior strategists within the Imperium to regard the Tyranids not merely as an enemy, but as an existential threat unlike any other. Wars against rival empires or even against the forces of chaos, terrible as they are, remain wars in a recognizable sense, conflicts with objectives, strategies, and the possibility, however distant, of eventual resolution. The war against the Tyranids admits no such possibility. There is no diplomatic overture that could be extended to an entity that experiences no hunger for territory or ideology, only biomass. There is no fortress that cannot eventually be starved out and consumed given sufficient time. Every victory against a hive fleet is, at best, a delay, because the greater mass of the Tyranid presence, whatever its true extent may be, continues to advance from somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, patient in a way that no mortal empire can afford to be. And yet, for all the horror associated with them, the Tyranids have also, inadvertently, forced the fractured and often quarrelsome powers of the galaxy toward something resembling unity, at least in isolated moments of crisis. Worlds that would otherwise regard one another with suspicion or open hostility have, on occasion, found themselves compelled to cooperate against a hive fleet bearing down on a shared border, because the alternative to cooperation is simply annihilation, offered without malice and without exception. Whether this pattern of temporary alliance offers any lasting hope against a threat of this magnitude remains an open question, one that history has not yet answered. The Imperium endures for now, and the void beyond its borders remains watched, its augur stations scanning ceaselessly for the telltale signatures of an approaching fleet. But every scholar who has studied the Tyranid phenomenon in depth arrives, eventually, at the same uneasy conclusion. The high fleets encountered so far, vast and terrible as they have been, may represent only a fraction of what still moves through the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of any sensor or scout, the greater mass of the Tyranid presence continues its slow, inexorable advance. And it will not stop because it cannot stop until it has consumed everything, or until something, at last, finds a way to stop it first.